Grover Cleveland was the only person who ever served two non-consecutive terms as President of the United States, from 1885 to 89 and from 1893 to 97. He was also the only president to actually get married in the White House. His wife, Frances, at 22 years of age, was the youngest First Lady in American history and about 27 years his junior. Just to take a brief look at his life before the presidency, Grover Cleveland was born on the 18th of March, 1837 in Caldwell, New Jersey. He was a distant relative of Moses Cleveland, after whom the city of Cleveland in Ohio is named. His father, Richard, died when Grover was just 16 years of age, and 2 years later, young Grover moved to western New York to work for his uncle as a law clerk. In his spare time, he read law, worked very hard, very ambitious, studied law, and by the age of 22 in 1859, he became qualified as a lawyer. When the Civil War broke out, Cleveland hired a substitute to take his place and continued to work in his law practice. He worked hard, was quite ambitious, worked many long hours, and joined the Democratic Party using his uncle's political connections to advance his career. By 1870, he was elected Sheriff of Erie County in New York State. As sheriff, the executioner was not available on one occasion, and Cleveland himself personally hanged two convicted murderers, Patrick Morrissey for the murder of his mother and another murderer named John Gaffney. A decade later, his political opponents branded him as the hangman, but this didn't seem to do his career much harm. After 2 years as sheriff, Cleveland returned to law in the private practice, but still maintained contact with the Democratic Party, even though he was not an elected official. By the mid-1870s, both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, were badly damaged by all sorts of financial scandals which had erupted in the decade after the Civil War. Contracts were greatly overpriced, kickbacks paid to politicians, and millions of dollars wasted in public funds with overpriced contracts. Republicans in New York were both damaged by scandal and divided into factions. In this scenario, the Democrats took advantage of the situation by putting forward Cleveland as a young, clean candidate for mayor of Buffalo. He won the election, became a very anti-corruption mayor, vetoing contracts and bills, and developed a strong reputation and developed the Buffalo sewerage system as well, and developed a very strong reputation as an anti-corruption politician. The Democratic Party was also split into factions, and in this scenario, Cleveland went forward and was elected governor of New York in 1882. As governor, he continued to fight against corruption, vetoing 8 bills in his first 3 months in office. In his first 2 years as governor, he developed a name for hard work, for efficiency, and for getting things done, and was even admired among Republicans who agreed with his approach. People in both parties at this stage were fed up with corruption. In 1884, Grover Cleveland went forward at the Democratic National Convention and, against all odds, won the nomination. He went on later, a few months later in November, and beat James G. Blaine in the November election. So within a very brief period, 3 or 4 years, Cleveland had moved rapidly from sheriff to governor to president. As president, he continued with his policy of financial conservatism. He was totally opposed to the squander of public money. He vetoed several financial bills, the Veterans Pensions Bill, a bill to assist farmers in Texas who suffered from severe drought. He also set up the Interstate Commerce Commission, which set prices for transport systems for decades. He believed that tariffs should be kept as low as possible for revenue purposes only, not to act as a barrier to trade, which increased prices to consumers. He also supported the gold standard, believing if the dollar was based on silver, it would lead to inflation and increase the national debt also. His overall economic policy was based on sound money backed by gold, a low tariff to create competition and keep prices down, and a determination to minimise government spending wherever possible. As president, he remained true to this party platform that he was elected on, that of financial conservative, so that by 1884 Cleveland had developed such a reputation as a reformer and conservative that many like-minded Republicans in the Republican Party also supported him in Congress. In relation to foreign affairs, Cleveland was anti-imperialist. He opposed American expansionism. However, he did believe in a powerful, strong defence system for the country. His Secretary of War, William C. Endicott, set up a powerful United States coastal defence system which lasted until the Second World War. The Navy was also modernised and further expanded with the addition of 16 additional battleships, which helped to win the Spanish-US War and also contributed to the First World War. Please subscribe if you'd like more detail in a future video in relation to these issues. As President, Cleveland, like most politicians, both North and South, realised that the whole experiment of Reconstruction was something of a failure by the mid-1880s. He was reluctant to enforce the 15th Amendment, which granted voting rights to people of colour. He was reluctant to send in federal troops to the South, as he believed this could inflame the situation further. In relation to Native Americans, Cleveland pushed through the enforcement of the Dawes Act of 1887, which made it possible for Indian families to buy their own land. His predecessor, Chester Arthur, had opened up 4 million acres of Indian land in the Dakota area to white settlement. But this broke previous agreements with the tribes. Cleveland rescinded the order and basically sent in the army to clear the area of white settlers. In relation to his personal life, Cleveland got married in 1886 to Frances Folsom, the daughter of his former law partner. She was only 21 years of age and therefore about 27 years his junior, and she was the youngest First Lady in US history. The couple got married and went on to have 5 children thereafter. In 1888, the Republican Party nominated Benjamin Harrison, the grandson of a former president, to run for the Republicans. And he concentrated on the issue of the tariff as the main issue of the election. Cleveland won the actual popular vote, 48 votes to 47%, but he lost the Electoral College. Harrison won at 233 to 168 votes. Harrison was committed to a higher tariff, and this was contrary to the Democratic Party policy. With Harrison as president, therefore, Cleveland continued to be a strong voice within the Democratic Party, defending both the gold standard and a low tariff. In 1892, the election came round again, which was largely a repeat. The two same candidates, Harrison and Cleveland, fought the second election. However, on this occasion, Harrison's wife, Caroline, died a couple of weeks before the election. The election and both parties, as a result, stopped their campaign as a mark of respect. James Weaver split the Republican Party and ran as a populist candidate in the West. Cleveland won the 92 election and won both the popular vote and the Electoral College vote. The second period as president for Cleveland was a more difficult affair between 1893 and 97. Basically, what happened was the Silver Purchase Act of 1890 expanded the money supply during the Harrison presidency. Cleveland attempted to shift the policy back to the gold standard because he was basically afraid that a silver-based dollar would lead to inflation. However, he failed to reduce the McKinley tariff, which meant that increased prices for many consumer goods. This sort of confusion of economic policy in the United States, combined with a crash on the London Stock Exchange, made a perfect storm and led to the massive panic of 1893. This was the worst depression in US history up to that time. Banks and railway companies went bankrupt. Tens of thousands of people lost their job. There was no proper welfare system, so thousands of people were hungry. Railway companies cut wages in an attempt to survive themselves. But this led to the massive strike, the Pullman strike in Chicago. Without trains, there was no proper mail service. Cleveland felt forced to send in the troops to Chicago, and in violent clashes, dozens of strikers were killed. At the same time, Jacob S. Coxey led an army of working men marching on to Washington, D.C., demanding employment through public works and also demanding a return of the silver dollar. These forces basically combined to make Cleveland a very unpopular president, and the Republicans won a massive landslide in the midterm elections of 94. Thereafter, even sections of the Democratic Party began to desert the president. During the Harrison presidency as well, businessmen in Hawaii, in relation to foreign affairs, denounced the Queen and set up their own Republican government under Sanford B. Dole. The annexation of Hawaii was a live political issue in the United States at this time, but Cleveland was basically opposed to American expansionism by force. An investigation into the situation in Hawaii revealed that most people actually on the islands were opposed to US annexation. However, the Dole government were left in place. The Queen was actually dethroned at this point. Cleveland also became involved in a border dispute between Venezuela and British Guyana. The president regarded this as a matter for American interests as it was part of the Monroe Doctrine. Eventually, the matter was settled in favour of British Guyana at a tribunal in Paris in 1899. Construction of the coastal defence system continued in Cleveland's second presidency. The Navy also expanded under Secretary Hilary Herbert. Additional new battleships were constructed to match the strongest European powers. In 1893, the President had a medical operation in order to have a cancer growth removed from his palate. The operation was kept secret in an attempt to avoid further instability. It took place on board a yacht belonging to a friend. 6 new states joined the actual union during the Harrison presidency, which was an interruption in the Cleveland presidency. Utah as a state joined the union as the 45th state in January 1896. The population of the United States at this stage was 75 million, and about 10% of that population were immigrants. By the end of Cleveland's second presidency in 1897, the United States had emerged as a leading world power. However, Cleveland himself was one of the most unpopular presidents ever. By then he was rejected even by large sections of the Democratic Party. However, his reputation for honesty and integrity stood the test of time, and he is now regarded by many historians as an average or even successful president. At one point as president, he stated that although the people should support the government should not support the people. So he was a strong conservative all the way through his life. Grover Cleveland died on the 24th of June 1908.